Okay, so today we're looking at inequalities, one-step inequalities that involve either division or multiplication as their one operation. Remember that we've already learned that you need to use inverse operations in order to solve equations. We're going to apply that same knowledge to solving our inequalities. So we have 4x is less than negative 12 for our example 1. Remember that we're trying to isolate the variable 4x. That means that x is being multiplied by 4. So to undo that times 4, we need to do the inverse operation. And the inverse operation of multiplication is division. We're going to divide both sides of our inequality by 4. Remember that we use the fraction bar to show division. 4 divided by 4 is going to give me 1, and 1 times x is x, so I've now isolated my variable. Negative 12 divided by 4 is going to be negative 3. We're going to bring down that inequality sign, so we get x is less than negative 3. When we worked on one-step inequalities with addition and subtraction, we learned how to graph them. We're going to put negative 3 there in the middle, work our way up a couple of units, and work our way down a couple of units. The solution is less than, so we're going to use an open circle. And less than goes to the left, so we're going to draw an arrow that goes to the left. Remember that if you have less than, it could be any value up to negative 3, but it cannot be exactly negative 3. Okay? And that is our first example. The solution there is 4x less than negative 12. X is less than negative 3. If you had wanted to use your circle diagram in order to solve that, you could also do that. Remember, you start with a variable that represents the x. You have a line segment that represents the operation that you're doing. You're multiplying by 4. You only have one operation, so we're going to go ahead and put the answer, which is negative 12, there in the next circle. Above the segment, we're going to do the inverse operation, and we know that the inverse of multiplication is division. So we're going to divide by 4. We're going to work backwards. Negative 12 divided by 4 is negative 3. So we're going to get the exact same solution. X is less than negative 3. We're going to move on to example 2, where we have 45 is greater than x divided by 5. Remember that the fraction bar tells me I am dividing. The inverse operation of division is, of course, multiplication. So, we have 45 is greater than x divided by 5. We're going to multiply both sides of our equation by 5. And if you feel more comfortable, you can put that 5 over 1 over here. That lets you know that it looks more like a fraction. And remember, we can cross-simplify when we're working with fractions. So 5 and 5 cancel out to equal 1. So now we have x times 1, which is, of course, 1. And that leaves me with the value, or just the variable, which is x. I do need to do my multiplication. I have 45 times 5. We know that 5 times 5 is 25. We're going to carry that 2. 4 times 5 is 20. Add the 2. We're going to get 225. So the value of our variable is going to be 225. Notice that when we started, our variable was here on the right. Now I have it on the left. If you will remember, when we graph an inequality, we want the variable to be on the left so that we can make sure we graph in correct direction. But if you change and flip your inequality, you must also flip your inequality sign. Notice how the point is pointing toward the x in both the top, where we have our original inequality, and on the bottom, where we have our solution. We're going to graph that. Remember that a graph doesn't have to have 0 on it. So 225. 226 and 227. Work my way down, 224 and 223. Again, that's less than, so we're going to use that open circle right at 225. I'm going to look at my inequality sign, and again, it's pointing to the left, so I'm going to make my arrow go to the left. And we have solved and graphed example 2. Example 3 and 4 provide us with some important information that you need to make sure you remember. If you multiply or divide by a negative, then you have to flip the inequality sign. That is because that when you multiply by a negative, you're finding the opposite of. When you divide by a negative, you're finding the opposite of. If you apply the opposite to the numbers that are involved in your equation or your inequality, in your inequality, then you're also going to have to do the opposite to your inequality sign, which means it needs to face the opposite direction. Okay, so we have negative 18 is greater than or equal to negative 3x. We are using multiplication here, so the inverse of multiplication is going to be division. We're going to need to divide. Notice that my coefficient is negative. I also notice that my variable is on the left-hand side, or on the right-hand side. I'm going to flip that so that I have my variable on the left. That means I got to flip my inequality sign. Don't forget that. Okay, so we have negative 3x is less than or equal to negative 18. I'm going to divide by negative 3. The negative divided by a negative is going to be positive, which leaves me just with my variable x. I've divided by a negative number. I need to flip my inequality sign, so it is now greater than or equal to. And negative 18 divided by negative 3 is going to give me a value of positive 6. That means the solution for this inequality is going to be x is greater than or equal to positive 6. 6, 8, 10. I'm just numbering by 2 just for kicks. You don't always have to go by 1, so you could use different numbering as long as you stay using the same system. Don't do by 1 sometimes and by 2 sometimes on the same number line. I'm going to have a closed circle because this is greater than or equal to, which means it could be exactly 6, or it could be anything that is more than 6 because it's greater than or equal to. Our last example is negative x divided by 7 is less than or equal to 42. The inverse of division is going to be multiplication. Okay. Remember that when you have a negative fraction, that means your product, or your quotient, that means your quotient is going to be negative. We don't want to end up with a negative sign in front of our variable because that means the opposite of x. We're not trying to find the value of the opposite of x, we want to find the value of x. That means that we're going to need to multiply both sides of this inequality by a negative 7. Because a negative times a negative, of course, is going to give me a positive. So my negatives cancel each other out. And then I can also cross simplify on my 7, which leaves me with just x. I have multiplied by a negative number. I have to also apply the rule of opposite to my inequality sign. I'm going to do my math and check. 42 times 7. I'll go ahead and put my negative sign here because I know a positive times a negative is negative. That way I won't forget. And 2 times 7 is 14. I'm going to carry a 1, and I'm going to have 294. That means x is greater than or equal to negative 294. I'm going to erase that so that I can do my graph. negative 294. My numbers are kind of big. I'm just going to put one value on each side just because I'm running out of space, although I do want that to look a little more even than what it is. There we go. I'm going to make that negative 295. We do have that bar underneath our inequality sign, so that means or equal to. So we're going to need a closed circle. And we did flip our inequality sign. It's no longer less than or equal to, it is greater than or equal to. Remember, you can put that stick in your inequality sign to show you which way your arrow wants to go. So we're going to graph with an arrow to the right. So we have now solved all 4 of our examples. Please remember that when you graph, you want the variable to be on the left-hand side. If you had to flip to get the variable on the left, then you also have to flip the inequality sign. Also remember that if you multiply or divide by a negative number, you need to flip the inequality sign as well. There may be times, such as example number 3, where you have to reverse or flip your inequality sign 2 times, because we did it once to get the variable on the left, and then we had to do it a second time because we had divided by a negative number.